I thought I knew what humiliation felt like, but nothing prepared me for the moment the spotlight landed on her instead of me. The Des Moines Art Center was glowing that night. 10 years of marriage, and my husband had insisted on hosting our anniversary gala there. He said it was to honor our partnership, but in reality, it was his stage. The atrium was packed. Family, colleagues, donors, even people I hadn't seen in years. And when the lights dimmed, I expected him to call me up beside him. Instead, he reached for another woman's hand. Her. She stepped forward like she'd been rehearsing for weeks, her sequined gown shimmering under the chandeliers. My gown. The one I'd picked out weeks ago after he changed his mind and told me it didn't fit the event's tone. My throat tightened. The crowd gasped before falling into that sickening hush where whispers carried louder than words. Isn't that Natalie's dress? Wait, is she serious? Oh my God, he wouldn't. Yes, he would. I stood frozen near the front table, my daughter clutching my hand so tightly I could feel her nails dig into my skin. My best friend Julia was whispering, "Don't move, Nat. Don't give them a show." But it was already a show, and I was the unwilling headliner. My husband, no, the man I'd shared my life with, cleared his throat into the microphone. Tonight is about celebrating growth, vision, and new beginnings. New beginnings. I almost laughed. He turned toward her, sliding his arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. I want to recognize someone who's been an incredible inspiration to me these last few years. She's been by my side, pushing me forward. The room rippled with discomfort. People exchanged glances, some of them avoiding looking at me entirely. My father-in-law shifted in his chair, his lips pressed tight. And then the mistress, God, I hate even saying it, leaned into the mic with a sugary smile. It's an honor to stand here tonight. Love should be celebrated in its purest form, and I think what we've found deserves that spotlight. Purest form. She actually said that. My ears burned. I pushed back my chair, the screech echoing through the hall. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward me. For a moment, I saw him falter. His face drained of color, his mouth twitching as if he hadn't expected me to stand up at all. Natalie, he started, but I cut him off. Don't you dare say my name. The microphone squealed as my voice carried through the room, even without one in my hand. My legs were shaking, but rage steadied me. My daughter's grip loosened as Julia pulled her close, whispering something I couldn't hear. I walked straight to the stage. Every step clicked against the marble, each one louder than the last. My husband's hand slid off the mistress's waist, and for the first time he looked small. You've been married to me for 10 years, I said, my voice raw. 10 years of building your career, raising our child, covering your lies. And tonight, this is how you honor me? The mistress smirked, trying to hold her ground. Maybe it's time people know the truth. He deserves happiness. The crowd gasped again. That was her mistake. I closed the distance, inches from her face. Happiness built on lies isn't happiness. It's rot dressed in sequins. My hand rose before I could stop it, the crack of the slap slicing through the hall like a whip. Her head snapped to the side, makeup smeared against her cheek. No one moved. No one breathed. My husband lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. What the hell are you doing? What I should have done the first time I caught you slipping out at midnight. My voice was steady, louder than his. You think this humiliation breaks me? No. This is the start of your end. I ripped my arm free, the heat in my chest boiling into something sharper, cleaner. I faced the audience, scanning the sea of shocked faces. Remember this moment, I said, projecting every ounce of fury into the room. Because the man you thought was successful, loyal, trustworthy, he just showed you exactly who he really is. The silence shattered with murmurs. Phones came out. I saw flashes, heard the click of cameras. The humiliation he wanted for me was becoming his. I turned back to him, his face pale under the lights. You don't get to destroy me quietly. You wanted public? Fine, you'll get public. Then I walked off that stage, past the rows of horrified faces, past the whispers and pitying stares. Julia had already whisked my daughter toward the exit. I didn't run. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me stumble. I kept my head high, even as my insides twisted. At the glass doors, I paused and looked back one last time. He was still on stage, frozen, his mistress clutching her cheek, the audience buzzing like a hive. I smiled. Not because I was okay. God, I was shattered. But because I knew something he didn't. This wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something he'd never see coming. As I pushed open the doors and stepped into the cool night air, I swore to myself, to my daughter, and to anyone watching, I would make him regret the day he ever thought I could be replaced. And this time, it wouldn't be in whispers. It would be loud enough for the whole damn world to hear. The drive home that night felt endless. My daughter was quiet in the back seat, too young to understand the weight of what she'd just witnessed, but old enough to sense that something had shattered. Julia's car followed close behind, her headlights steady in my rearview mirror like a lifeline. By the time I tucked my little girl into bed and closed her door, the silence of the house pressed in on me. It wasn't just the silence of that night. It was the silence of years. Years I had spent swallowing doubts, patching cracks, pretending that the man I married was still the one standing beside me. When I first met him, I was 24 and reckless with hope. He was charming in that practiced way, the kind of man who could light up a room with a smile and make you feel like you were the only person who mattered. I didn't notice how his eyes wandered or how he always seemed to need an audience. Back then, I was just proud to be the woman he chose. We built a life quickly. Marriage at 26, our daughter at 28, the house at 30. Most of the money didn't come from him. It came from me. My grandmother left me her inheritance, a solid foundation I never bragged about. I used it to buy the house outright, to fund the early years of his business ventures, to make sure we never struggled. He promised he'd pay it all back one day, that his success would eclipse it. But somehow, he always had an excuse to keep reinvesting profits or waiting for the right deal. Meanwhile, I built the real structure of our lives. Doctor appointments, school sign-ups, birthday parties, grocery runs, late-night fevers. He showed up when the cameras were around, when friends came over, when there was credit to be claimed. I convinced myself that was just the trade-off, that some men showed love differently. But the signs had always been there. The first time I smelled perfume on his jacket, he swore it was from a colleague who hugged him goodbye after a conference. I told myself I was overthinking. The late-night texts he claimed were urgent client calls. The sudden business trips that coincidentally fell on long weekends. Each time I swallowed my suspicion because the alternative, that he was betraying me, was too painful to face. And then there were the smaller, sharper cuts. Like the way he brushed off my ideas in front of his friends but later repeated them as if they were his own. The way he downplayed my work as a marketing consultant, even though my paycheck often carried us through. The way he always positioned himself as the victim of stress, of pressure, of expectations, so that I had to play the role of caretaker, encourager, stabilizer. Every time I pushed down my anger, I thought I was protecting my family. I thought staying quiet meant keeping us whole. After the gala, that illusion was impossible to sustain. The next morning, Julia sat across from me at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold between us. She'd been my friend since high school, the one person who could cut through my defenses without trying. "You know this isn't new, right?" she said softly. I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, then slid her phone across the table. Photos. Him and the mistress. At a bar. At a hotel lobby. Not just one night. Multiple. My chest tightened. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," she admitted. "But you weren't ready. And I didn't want to be the one to break you." The tears came hot and fast. Not just from betrayal, but from shame. Shame that everyone else had seen what I had refused to. Later that day, while I was folding laundry, my daughter padded into the room, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her voice was small, careful. "Mommy, why was Daddy holding that other lady's hand last night?" The air left my lungs. I crouched down, brushing hair from her forehead. Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people. But it's not your fault. Do you understand? She nodded slowly, but the hurt in her eyes gutted me. She had seen enough to know. That was the final confirmation. Not Julia's photos, not the whispers, not even the slap heard around the gala. It was my daughter's innocent question that sealed it. There was no room left for denial, no excuse left to cling to. He had betrayed not just me, but her too. And I couldn't let that stand. For 10 years, I had carried him, protected him, elevated him, but from that moment forward, my silence ended. If he wanted to play with fire in public, then I would burn down the stage he built. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, pages of receipts and emails spread like evidence in front of me. The house hummed with the small, familiar sounds of a home I had built. The fridge kicking on, the old clock in the hallway, my daughter's hamster in its wheel. Everything felt ordinary and filthy at the same time. Grief hit first, then a precision I hadn't known I owned. Grief is loud, strategy is quiet. I let the grief rinse through me until it exhausted itself. Then I started to make the world practical again. First, paperwork. I pulled every document from the office drawer, mortgage papers, the title that still bore my grandmother's name stamped through inheritance, insurance policies, bank statements. I made a list: accounts in my name, accounts joint, credit cards, the company payroll records where he was still listed as benefactor. I photographed everything with my phone, clear, dated images, evidence his patience made visible. Second, the bank. I dressed, kissed my daughter's hair like a benediction, and walked into the branch before anyone else was awake. My voice was steady when I told the manager I needed immediate changes. Since the house and a majority of our savings were legally mine, the bank put temporary administrative holds on transfers pending verification. I didn't lie. I told them I was consulting counsel and needed protection. They moved with that specific bureaucratic speed that suddenly felt like an ally. I hadn't known how much power came from knowing the right forms. I signed paperwork that changed online access, revoked pre-authorized payments tied to his cards, and set alerts for any account activity. I authorized a secondary login only to my phone. If he tried to move muscle, he'd find his hands tied to a glass table. Third, my lawyer. I'd called her earlier, late-night calls because that's when truths get sharp, and she arrived at my house by 9, 2 boxes of legal files under her arm like a portable armory. "Good," she said, already flipping through my photos. "We move fast. We move clean. Temporary custody, emergency financial order, and we lock down anything you can lose." She outlined the steps: file for legal separation, request temporary exclusive use of the house for stability of the child, and file for an emergency accounting so his business finances would be reviewed. She told me what evidence mattered and what to leave alone. Fourth, safety and message control. I changed passwords, emailed 2-factor authentications, and set up a private mailbox for sensitive documents. I moved a few valuables into a safe deposit box: my grandmother's locket, a stack of old checks, and the original deed. I copied keys and left a set with Julia. I called our accountant and asked her to freeze any outgoing auto payments to contractors listed under his name and to reroute invoices to my email for approval. The accountant didn't ask why. She knew enough to act. Fifth, inventory and optics. I began the slow, cold work of cataloging the house and the life we'd made. Furniture, investments, that painting he always pretended to dislike. If the divorce became a war, and it would, then clarity about assets would be my ammunition. I scheduled a trusted realtor to come by under the most neutral pretense. I need advice on market conditions. The realtor left with a valuation and a plan. Because the house was in my name, I had the legal right to list it if I chose. I didn't list it that day. I listed the option. Moving pieces into place is about leverage, not impulse. Finally, the first public shock. Before noon, I sent a certified letter to his office, a simple statement. We were separating, pending legal action, and that he should refrain from any public statements concerning our family. I copied the letter to his board connections and to a few mutual donors who had a right to know. I kept the language factual, no venom, only a concise declaration that things were changing and that any misrepresentation would be met with legal response. The small things started to ripple. By mid-afternoon, his corporate card was declined at a golf club where he kept a running tab. He called me that evening, his voice raw, desperate, asking if something was wrong with the accounts. I didn't answer. Instead, I texted him a single line. "Call my lawyer." He did. His voice over the line morphed from disbelief to anger to panic in 3 breaths. "Natalie, what are you doing? We can talk," he began. "No," I interrupted. "Calm now. The kind of calm that cuts. You can call your attorney. You can call whoever you want, but don't call me. Not until you've understood that I am done being invisible in my own life." He didn't understand. Of course he didn't. Men like him think power is a thing you shout about from a stage, not the quiet, methodical accumulation of control. He still assumed he could sweep back in, charm his way out of the mess. He had no idea I'd already set the table. When he hung up, his first panic call concluded. I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't satisfaction. It was distance. Clean, terrible distance. I had taken the place in the capricious machinery where choice lived. The rest would be execution. I sat back down at the kitchen table where the lamp still burned. The papers a little neater now. My phone a safe repository of proof. For the first time in years, I could hear my own breath. I had made a decision, and with it, the quiet machinery of revenge was already moving. The first day after I moved, the pieces felt like the day after a storm. Strewn debris, a weird stillness, and the slow drip of things falling apart. It started small and domestic. At noon, he tried to pick up lunch at the country club, someone told me later, and his corporate card declined. The waiter's face went polite and then apologetic. The guy at the table next to him fidgeted and looked pointedly away. He swore it was a mistake, but the embarrassment tasted like iron on his tongue. Word travels fast in Des Moines. Gossip is a public utility. Within hours, the decline had a dozen eyes on it. A partner from his firm called his office and asked for an explanation. "Are we at risk?" she asked, voice clipped. He stammered about a banking error. That same partner then called our mutual accountant, who had recently been looped into my requests. "I know because the accountant texted me. Can you confirm you authorized holds?" I replied with the dates, the signed forms, and an attachment. Proof is petty to someone who's already shattered, but to a bank or board it's decisive. The mistress, she hadn't expected this part. She messaged him in the middle of the afternoon. "Where are the transfers?" Her tone was equal parts confusion and fury. He texted back, begging, promising, then swore and demanded answers from people who were now politely stonewalling him. The woman who wore my dress started posting pictures with coy captions that tried too hard to look like normal life. People didn't meet her eyes anymore. At a fundraiser the next week, 2 donors walked by without shaking her hand. That kind of social rejection moves in a current. Quiet but lethal. His phone calls multiplied, each one a little more urgent. Vendors he'd always charmed suddenly asked for upfront payments. The mortgage company left a message. A contractor he'd used for improvements emailed politely asking for a conversation about outstanding invoices. My actions hadn't ruined him yet. They'd simply cracked open the places people usually ignored: trust, credit lines, favors that come from reputation. Those things have an expiration date once the scent of trouble gets into the room. On social media, the Gala footage that someone posted the night I walked out circulated in low-grade loops. Grainy phone clips, shaky hands, a dozen captions. It hadn't reached the national feeds yet, but our town is loud enough. People I hadn't seen since college sent short, careful messages. "You okay? Are you sure?" A few sent emoji hearts, others sent thin, clinical sympathy. I didn't need sympathy. I needed the truth to be real in paper, in ledgers, in decisions. Family lines shifted too. My mother-in-law called once and then again, voice thick with confusion. She didn't accuse. She asked how I was doing. My father-in-law, who had sat rigid at the gala, left a voicemail. Formal, distant. "Natalie, when you have a moment." It wasn't the same soft, conspiratorial tone he'd used when praising my casseroles. He sounded like a man who'd been forced awake by an alarm he hadn't set. Some people I assumed would take his side surprised me. His brother, proud, cautious, texted, "This is messy. Want me to come by?" He came later that week, not to plead for the husband, but to ask what I planned to do about custody in the house. You could see the math in his expression. Reputation equals stability. Instability equals risk. He'd been tipped, quietly, and he wanted to know which way the wind would blow before placing his chips. At the office, his staff avoided eye contact. An assistant who used to laugh at his jokes stopped laughing. A senior colleague called me, off the record, saying they were concerned for the company and wanted to know if I had documentation showing any misuse of funds. I did not answer that call with glee. I answered it with the same methodical patience I'd used at the bank. Send proof, ask for meetings, set the expectation that there would be scrutiny. The ripple reached the mistress again. She messaged one of his close friends, trying to shore up support, and got radio silence. By then, she'd started to understand that social capital is fragile, that being the visible new thing doesn't make you permanent. The people who had smiled at her presence at the gala were now leaning back, evaluating whether the association was worth their name. And he did what desperate people do. He called everyone he thought would be loyal. He cornered a junior associate in the parking lot and begged for help replacing a vendor check. He went to the country club and tried to cajole the manager into ignoring the decline. He called his father and stuttered apologies that landed like wet confetti. Each attempt made him smaller. Each refusal widened a space that would be hard to cross again. That evening, after a day of cold calls and patient legal maneuvers on my side, the phone lit up with unfamiliar numbers, and then one I knew too well. He left 3 voicemails in a row, breathless and breaking. The first was denial. "It's a mistake, Nat. I didn't know." The second was pleading. "Please, we can fix this. Talk to me." The third was furious and ridiculous. "You can't do this, you selfish." Then static. Then silence. I listened to them all the next morning. I saved them. They were the sound of a man who'd thought his life was a stage and discovered the curtains had been pulled. At dusk, when I was folding a towel, small domestic motions to keep the day from unraveling, I heard a knock. Not the polite, prearranged knock of a neighbor, but hard, frantic pounding. Julia opened the door. I watched from the top of the stairs as he stood on our porch, hands splayed, rain on his jacket, eyes wild in a way I'd never seen before. He looked like a man who had just realized how much he'd risked and how quickly the world could close its doors. He banged on the wood again and called my name, hoarse. It was the first time he'd come to me instead of calling, an escalation, the first desperate attempt to reach me in person. I didn't move. I folded the towel, set it down neat and dry, and let the house breathe around me. I didn't plan the second confrontation down to the minute, but I knew it had to happen where silence couldn't shield him. That moment came 2 weeks later, at his father's birthday dinner. A small banquet room at one of the better restaurants downtown, white tablecloths, polished wine glasses, servers moving like shadows. He hadn't spoken to me directly since pounding on my door, but the invitation to the dinner still came, probably from his mother, hoping to paper over the cracks. I went, not because I cared about appearances, but because the timing was perfect. The legal filings had already been submitted and people were whispering. He thought if I stayed away, he could spin the story. If I showed up, he'd have to face me. And more importantly, face everyone else with me present. I walked in wearing a dress the color of steel, my daughter holding Julia's hand just behind me. The room stilled. Conversations dropped into hushed fragments. His mother stood to greet me, relief flashing across her face, while my father-in-law gave me a single grave nod. And then there was him. Sitting at the far end, his mistress tucked into the seat beside him. She was trying too hard to smile, her hand resting on his arm as if claiming territory. He looked tired, eyes sunken, suit slightly wrinkled. For the first time, I saw not the man I had once married, but a man scrambling to hold on to scraps. Dinner moved in stilted motions. Toasts were made, food served, conversation polite. He avoided my gaze, but I didn't let him escape. When dessert arrived, I stood. The scrape of my chair cut through the room. "I have something to say," I announced. Every eye turned to me. His hand tightened around his wine glass. "For 10 years I carried this family. I bought the house. I raised our child. I backed his business when it had nothing but empty promises. And while I did that, he repaid me by building another life in the shadows." The mistress bristled. "That's not fair." "Oh, it's fair," I shot back, my voice sharp. "Fair is having receipts." I pulled out the small folder I had tucked in my bag, laid it on the table, and slid it toward his father. "Hotel records, credit card statements, photos. This is who your son has been while pretending to be a husband and father." Gasps rippled around the table. His brother leaned forward, lips pressed thin, while his mother covered her mouth with her hand. My daughter wasn't old enough to read the documents, but she was old enough to see me standing tall, unflinching. That mattered. He slammed his glass down. "Natalie, stop this circus. We can talk privately." "No," I cut in. "You chose public. You humiliated me at a gala. You brought her into my place, and you thought I'd bow my head and take it. Tonight, everyone hears the truth." His father picked up the folder, flipping through the pages with deliberate calm. When he looked up, his face was stone. "Is this accurate?" he stammered. "Dad, it's complicated." The mistress tried to interject, but he snapped at her. "Shut up." The word cracked like a whip, and the room froze. Whatever sympathy anyone might have felt drained in that instant. She pushed back her chair, face red, and stormed out, her heels clattering against the tile. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of his father's voice. "You've disgraced this family." That line was lethal. You could see it land, see his shoulders sag, his jaw clench. His last ally severed with one sentence. I leaned forward, my voice steady, cold. "This isn't just about betrayal. It's about accountability. You thought you could rewrite the story, but tonight, the story writes itself." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The room carried the weight for me. Every eye, every camera phone subtly recording, every whisper that would leave that restaurant and spread. When I sat back down, he stayed standing, his face pale and lost. For once, he had no lines rehearsed, no audience applause. Just silence. The second humiliation was complete. And this time, it wasn't just whispered gossip. It was a verdict. He tried to fight back. Of course he did. Men like him don't crumble quietly. They scramble, claw, and spin. 3 days after the restaurant disaster, a local TV station aired a segment. There he was, my husband in a tailored suit, sitting across from a reporter. He painted himself as the victim of a vindictive ex. He smiled at the camera, voice dripping with practiced sincerity, saying he was deeply hurt by false accusations and only wanted to focus on his daughter. He even held up a photo of her, the same one I'd taken on her first day of school, as though fatherhood could be weaponized into sympathy. For a few hours, it worked. Some people posted support online. Everyone makes mistakes. Let them heal. Cancel culture goes too far. His allies tried to resurface, parroting the idea that I was unstable, bitter, out for revenge. But then the receipts dropped. Not from me directly. My lawyer had warned me to keep my hands clean. But allies don't need instructions when the truth is heavy enough to spill on its own. Screenshots of his texts leaked onto Facebook groups, then Twitter. Not vague innuendo, explicit messages, hotel bookings, Jokes about me being too busy playing house to notice. His mistress's Instagram stories were quietly screenshotted and shared, time-stamped proof of the nights he claimed he was on business trips. And then came the video. Someone at the gala uploaded the full confrontation. Me standing tall, slapping the woman in my dress, and calling him out while the crowd gasped. The clip hit 1 million views in less than 48 hours. Comment sections tore him apart. The hashtags followed. Gala wife, her dress, her spotlight. Receipts don't lie. He tried another interview, this time on a podcast, claiming the video was out of context. But once the internet has a narrative, you can't wrestle it back. Every denial spawned duets, memes, remixes. People weren't just mocking him. They were dismantling his brand. Sponsors quietly pulled back from his business ventures. Invitations dried up. His name went from local golden boy to walking punchline. The mistress vanished from the picture entirely. She deleted her social media, blocked comments, and stopped appearing in public with him. When reporters asked where she was, he dodged the question, face twitching. It didn't matter. By then, the narrative was clear. He wasn't a man in love. He was a liar caught mid-performance. And me? I stayed quiet. No interviews, no statements. Silence is sometimes louder than words. People read my stillness as dignity, as proof I had nothing to hide. Julia joked that I had become the face of righteous silence. I didn't correct her. Every day I watched him unravel further. His desperate posts about privacy got ratioed into oblivion. His father's cold disavowal leaked into the press, a headline all its own. Even his closest friends stopped tagging him in photos. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a collapse. By the end of the month, his name was trending again, but this time paired with words like fraud, cheater, disgrace. The man who thought he could humiliate me into silence had been publicly stripped bare. And I hadn't even started the legal war yet. That part was still to come. If the public collapse bruised his ego, the legal fallout crushed everything else. Scandal fades. Court orders do not. My lawyer filed for temporary custody first. It was straightforward. Stability, continuity, protecting our daughter from chaos. Judges like clean narratives, and mine was spotless. Mother provides, father destabilizes. The order came through in weeks. He was granted visitation, but only supervised until further review. The moment he heard, he called me, voice trembling with rage. "You can't keep my daughter from me." I let the silence answer. Next came the financial dismantling. Emergency hearings froze the accounts he had once used like personal ATMs. Every withdrawal required documentation. His business partners balked when subpoenas arrived requesting years of expense reports. They called him a liability in their emails, which my lawyer gleefully submitted into the record. Deals evaporated. Contractors walked away. The company that had once puffed up his chest shrank into a sinking shell. The house became my fortress. Because the deed was in my name, the judge granted me exclusive occupancy. He tried to argue, said his name was on the utility bills, that he deserved access. The judge shut him down. This property was inherited. "Mr. Fisher, you have no legal claim." I saw his face crumple, and for the first time I almost pitied him. Almost. The mistress fared no better. Once the golden accessory, she became radioactive. Friends unfollowed her, colleagues whispered, even her own family distanced themselves. When she tried to reach out to him, he snapped at her in public. Their fight caught on a bystander's phone and uploaded online. Her exit was fast and unceremonious. Whatever fantasy she'd clung to disintegrated under the weight of real consequences. Family lines hardened. His father, who had once introduced him at galas with pride, now refused to take his calls. Word spread quickly. The elder Fisher told associates that his son was cut off, no more safety net. His brother, cautious to the end, quietly pulled his financial backing from joint ventures. That left him exposed, stripped of both reputation and resources. By summer, the divorce proceedings rolled like a freight train. Property division was laughably one-sided. The court recognized that most assets originated from my inheritance. He left hearings red-faced, muttering about unfairness. My lawyer reminded him, point by point, that fairness was already written in signatures he had ignored years ago. Child support was calculated next. With his income shrinking, the numbers bit hard. He begged the court for leniency, citing dwindling revenue. The judge wasn't swayed. Your reduced income appears to be the result of personal misconduct, not misfortune, the order read. He was bound to pay, and failure would mean wage garnishment. The ripple spread further. His golf club revoked his membership. The board of a local nonprofit asked him to resign for the good of the mission. He walked out of meetings, slamming doors, leaving behind whispers that carried across town. By then, his name was shorthand for collapse, a cautionary tale parents muttered over cocktails. Don't be a fisher. Even his friends grew scarce. Men he once called brothers avoided eye contact at restaurants. Couples we had known for years invited me, but not him. Julia told me she overheard someone say, "Natalie upgraded by subtraction." I smiled when she repeated it. It wasn't an upgrade. It was reclamation. The last straw came when his apartment lease fell through. Without steady income or guarantors, landlords refused to sign. For weeks he couch-surfed, calling friends, begging family. Eventually, he ended up in a dingy rental on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the house he'd once bragged about owning. At night, I watched my daughter sleep in the safety of her own room, knowing she was shielded from the storm he'd created. My lawyer told me, "You've won more than most women ever do." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving with precision. And him? He had nothing left to spin. No mistress, no money, no family shield. The man who once thought humiliation was a weapon now lived in its shadow every single day. And I wasn't done yet. The final confrontation still waited. I didn't expect to see him again, not face to face. By then the lawyers had gutted him, the courts had ruled, and the world had turned its back. But one evening in late fall, I found him waiting outside the courthouse after yet another procedural hearing. He looked small. Not the man who had strutted onto stages, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. His suit hung loose, like it belonged to a bigger man. His shoes were scuffed. His eyes carried that restless look of someone who no longer slept. "Natalie," he said, his voice breaking on my name. I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, file tucked under my arm. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you. Just once, please." His hands trembled as he shoved them into his coat pockets. "I've lost everything. The business is gone. My father won't speak to me. My brother. He won't even return my calls. I'm alone." "You did that to yourself." He flinched, but pressed on. "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed you. I was stupid, arrogant. I thought I was untouchable, and I wasn't. I ruined us. But please, Natalie, I can't survive like this." "You've already won. Haven't you punished me enough?" For a moment I studied him. His voice was cracked, his shoulders sagging, his confidence long gone. This was not the man who had humiliated me under chandeliers, paraded his mistress in my dress, laughed at my suspicions. This was a shell. "You think this is punishment?" I asked softly. "No. This is consequence. Punishment is something someone else does to you. Consequence is what you create for yourself." He swallowed hard, eyes pleading. "I'm begging you. Just say something. Tell me there's a chance you'll forgive me one day. That I won't have to die hated by everyone." The desperation in his tone should have stirred pity. Instead, it stirred clarity. "You want forgiveness? You'll have to find it on your own. Not from me, not from our daughter. She'll learn the truth about the choices you made, and she'll decide for herself who you are." He shook his head violently. Don't poison her against me. She's all I have left." "She's not yours to claim," I snapped, my voice cold. "You lost the right to call her yours the moment you chose yourself over her family." She deserves a father who shows up, not one who hides behind lies and other women's shadows. His face crumpled, and for the first time I saw tears spill down his cheeks. The man who once mocked me for being too emotional now sobbed openly, shoulders heaving on the courthouse steps. "I loved you," he whispered hoarsely. "I did. I didn't know how to stop myself. That's not love," I said. "That's greed. That's ego. And it destroyed you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice until he had to meet my eyes. "You were the architect of your own destruction. Every lie, every late-night text, every hand you held that wasn't mine. You built this collapse brick by brick. Don't you dare lay it at my feet." He sobbed harder, reaching as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to touch me ever again. You don't get to beg at the feet of the woman you tried to bury. I walked out of your shadow, and I am never stepping back." The street lamps flickered on as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The world felt strangely quiet, like even the city was holding its breath. He knelt on the cold stone, broken in every way a man could be. But I didn't soften. I didn't offer him my hand. I turned, file still tucked under my arm, and walked down the courthouse steps. Behind me, his sobs echoed against the stone walls, fading with each step I took away from him. For the first time since the gala, my shoulders felt light. Not because I had crushed him, he'd done that to himself, but because I had finally drawn the line so deep it could never be crossed again. And with that, I was free. A year can change everything. 12 months after the gala, my life bore almost no resemblance to the one I'd once fought to preserve. The house was still mine, but it felt different, lighter, brighter. I'd repainted the walls in colors I chose without compromise. My daughter's laughter filled the rooms without tension trailing behind it. For the first time, home was a sanctuary, not a stage set for someone else's ego. I had rebuilt my career, too. The marketing consultancy I'd once kept small to accommodate his ambitions had grown. Word spread fast in Des Moines, people admired resilience, and my silence during the PR war had earned respect. Companies called me directly now, wanting the woman who had kept her composure while her husband crumbled on camera. I took the jobs I wanted, turned down the ones that didn't fit, and stacked contracts on my terms. Independence wasn't a dream anymore. It was the foundation. My daughter thrived. She no longer asked why Daddy wasn't around as much. Instead, she focused on soccer practice, school plays, and drawing pictures of us taped proudly to the fridge. When she looked at me, I saw admiration in her eyes, a reflection of strength I hadn't known I carried until I was forced to wield it. And him? He became a ghost. The man who once filled banquet halls now lingered in the background of gossip. Occasionally, I heard scraps. He'd lost another apartment, picked up shifts at a logistics firm, drifted in and out of low-rent bars. His name no longer commanded attention. It was muttered, shrugged off, forgotten. Even his former friends treated him like a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fast arrogance can rot a reputation. Sometimes, people asked if I regretted the way it unfolded, if I wished I'd stayed quieter, kept things private. My answer never changed. No. Silence had been my prison. Speaking up, taking action, drawing boundaries, that was the key. I didn't need revenge anymore. Revenge was the spark that pushed me out of the shadows. But transformation was what kept me moving forward. The real victory wasn't in watching him collapse. It was in realizing I could build a life without him, a life that was mine alone. One evening, Julia and I sat on the back porch watching the fireflies. She leaned over, glass of wine in hand, and said, "You know, you're not the same woman you were a year ago." "No," I admitted. "I'm not." The woman I'd been would have smiled politely at disrespect, swallowed suspicions, and let the world think her life was perfect while it slowly suffocated her. The woman I was now spoke clearly, chose deliberately, and didn't apologize for demanding respect. As the night deepened and my daughter's laughter drifted from inside, I realized that betrayal hadn't broken me. It had freed me. He once thought my silence was weakness. He learned too late that it was patience. And when patience finally gave way to resolve, I walked out of his shadow and into my own light. That was the truth of it. The end of his world was not the end of mine. It was the beginning.